In the second part of this lecture on bounded sets in R, what we will discuss is that Peano's axioms imply that the set of positive integers is unbounded above. We will also prove the Archimedean property for R and show that the rational numbers are dense in R, which will also imply that between any two real numbers there are infinitely many irrational numbers. Okay, so we begin the lecture by discussing one property of bounded sets, which is very useful, that if you take a non-empty bounded subset of R, then the distance between the elements of the bounded subset is not going to be unbounded. That is, if you take a bounded subset, the elements of the set will be close enough. So precisely speaking, what we are trying to say is that if you take T, a bounded subset of R, which is non-empty, and if you look at the set of all the distances between the elements of T, that is capital S is equal to mod x minus y, where xy belongs to T, then capital S is bounded above and its supremum is supremum of T minus infimum of T. First of all, notice that capital S is non-empty because T is non-empty. So there is at least one element X belonging to T. Therefore, 0 belongs to S. Also, every element of S is going to be greater than equal to 0. Therefore, S is bounded below and 0 is its infimum. What we are trying to show now that it is also bounded above, and its supremum is given by supremum of T minus infimum of T. So let us start the formal proof. If you take any points x and y in T, then they will lie between infimum of T and supremum of T. So that is what we have written here, that both x and y lie between infimum T and supremum T. Now look at this inequality, and if you multiply this by minus 1, what you get, minus of supremum T is less than or equal to minus y is less than or equal to minus of infimum T, right? So if you just add up these two inequalities, you will get that x minus y is greater than equal to infimum T minus supremum T and is less than or equal to supremum T minus infimum T. So it is greater than equal to minus of supremum T minus infimum T. So therefore, you just recall your fundamental inequality. This would imply that mod x minus y is less than or equal to supremum T minus infimum T. Recall that supremum T minus infimum T is always a non-negative number, which we have seen in the last lecture. Okay, so mod x minus y is a typical element of the set S. Therefore, you have shown that S is bounded above. Now you intend to show that this upper bound which you get, supremum T minus infimum T, is indeed the least upper bound. So we have some practice in doing this. In the last lecture, we did several results of this type. What you have to do is that you have to decrease supremum T minus infimum T and show that even if you decrease it a little bit, it will no longer remain an upper bound of S. So for that, what we do is we choose any epsilon greater than 0, then use the property that supremum T is the least upper bound of T and infimum T is the greatest lower bound of T. So if you decrease supremum T by epsilon by 2, that is, if you look at supremum T minus epsilon by 2, then you will be able to get an element X in T which will be greater than that. Similarly, if you increase the infimum by epsilon by 2, then you will be able to get an element of T which is less than infimum of T plus epsilon by 2. So again, as was our usual practice, we multiply this inequality by minus 1. So we get minus of infimum t minus epsilon by 2 is less than minus y. So if you add this inequality with this one, then you will get supremum t minus infimum t minus epsilon is less than x minus y. Very good. Now look at the number x minus y. Then x minus y is always going to be less than or equal to a modulus of x minus y. This is true for any real number, say z. If z is positive, then modulus of z is equal to z, right? And if z is negative, then modulus of z is a positive number, so z will be strictly less than mod z. So if x minus y is negative, then it is going to be strictly less than modulus of x minus y. And if x minus y is non-negative, then it is going to be equal to modulus of x minus y. So you have already shown that supremum t minus infimum t minus epsilon is less than x minus y. So it is going to be less than modulus of x minus y. And we have seen that this is less than or equal to supremum t minus infimum t. So if you decrease this number supremum t minus infimum t by an amount epsilon, you have seen that there will be an element of the set capital S which will be greater than that. Therefore, this number supremum t minus infimum t minus epsilon will no longer be an upper bound of capital S. Hence, supremum t minus infimum t is the least upper bound of S. This is your proof. Right. So this is an interesting result and useful also. Next, we show that Peano's axioms actually imply that n is not bounded above. The way we prove this is by contradiction. So we assume that the set of positive integers is bounded above, and we will arrive at a contradiction. Okay, so since the set of positive integers is non-empty, and if possible, if you assume that it is bounded above, then by the order completeness of R, you know that n must have a supremum in R. So suppose supremum of n is equal to capital M. Then the real number m minus 1 is no longer an upper bound of n, because capital M is the least upper bound of capital N. Therefore, you will be able to get a positive integer little n, which will be strictly greater than m minus 1 and which is less than or equal to capital M. What does this imply? M minus 1 less than n implies that n plus 1 is greater than m. But we know that if little n is a positive integer, then little n plus 1 is also a positive integer. So we have found a positive integer n plus 1 which is greater than m. Hence, our assumption that capital M is the supremum of n is wrong, but we reach at this particular statement by assuming that the set of positive integers is bounded above. So therefore, this assumption is wrong, and hence, or rather false. Therefore, the statement that n is not bounded above is true. So we have shown that the set of positive integers is unbounded above. Using this, we will show that R satisfies Archimedean property. Remember, we had shown that the set of rational numbers satisfy Archimedean property, and there the proof involved used only arithmetic and some order relation. But now here we are going to use this sophisticated tool which we have which we have already learned, which is the notion of supremum as well as infimum of a set. So the way I've written the statement is not what you will get in many of the books, but I thought this generalization is okay. So therefore, Therefore, what I have done is that I have taken any xy in R where x is a positive number and y is any real number, and I want to claim that if I keep on adding x with itself, then after a certain stage it will become greater than y, however small x is. So in some books you will see that y is also chosen to be greater than 0, because this result is automatically or rather trivially true if you take y to be negative. Since x is positive, if y is negative or 0, then x will be greater than y. So therefore, for n equal to 1, the result will hold. So I have just incorporated this in the first statement which I make in the proof, that if x is greater than y, then the result holds for n is equal to 1. So this includes the uh, case when y is non negative or 0 also. Okay. If x is equal to y, then just take 2x, then 2x will be greater than x. Therefore, the result is true for x equal to y also. The only case which is left out and which is the interesting one is when x is less than y. So again, as I said in when I was discussing uh, rational numbers, that x could be a very small number and y could be a very large number, but even then this result claims, Archimedean property claims, that if you keep on adding x with itself, after a certain stage, that is, you will get a positive integer n, so that nx is greater than y. Okay, so again this proof is done by the proof by contradiction. So what we will do is that we wish to prove this statement, we will assume that this statement is false. Hence, we will assume that sub nx is less than y for all positive integers n. Then if you construct the set nx where n belongs to the set of positive integers, then this set is non-empty because x belongs to a, and it is also bounded above by y. So y is an upper bound of the set capital A. Hence, by the least upper bound property of the set of real numbers, supremum of A will exist in the set of real numbers. So let us call that supremum Z. Then what do you have? Now you have x is greater than 0. So z minus x is strictly less than z. Since z is the least upper bound, z minus x cannot be an upper bound of capital A. Therefore, there will exist an element nx of capital A which will be greater than z minus x. Now you add up, and obviously nx is less than or equal to z. Now you add x on both sides of this inequality. What do you get? You get z is less than n plus 1 x. Again, by Peano's axiom, since n is a positive integer, n plus 1 is also a positive integer. So n plus 1 x is also an element of A. So you have shown that there is an element of A which is greater than Z, which is a contradiction since Z was an upper bound of capital A. So therefore, our assumption that nx is less than y for all positive integers n is wrong, or rather false, and hence I will be able to get at least one positive integer n so that nx is greater than y. This result is an extraordinarily useful result in understanding real numbers, as we will see when we do the next proofs in this particular lecture itself and later on also. Okay, so I have discussed one example here which uses Archimedean property. Suppose I take the set capital S equal to 5 by n, where n belongs to the set of positive integers. So what is the set S? It is equal to 5, 5 by 2, 5 by 3, 5 by 4, 5 by 5, that is 1, 5 by 6, and so on. This set is clearly bounded set. Why is it a bounded set? Because all the numbers are greater than 0. So therefore 0 is a lower bound and all the numbers are less than or equal to 5. So 5 is an upper bound. Now we have already seen that if an upper bound is an element of the set, then that is automatically the supremum of the set. So since 5 belongs to S, supremum of S is going to be 5. We want to find out what is the infimum of S. So you see it keeps on decreasing, and we will show that this lower bound 0 is actually the greatest lower bound. So let us see how we will prove this. Suppose I take any x greater than 0. That is, I increase 0 by some positive thing. So I want to say that if I take any positive number x, then that will not be a lower bound of capital S. So therefore, 0 is going to be the greatest lower bound of capital S. So how will I show that? I use this Archimedean property of real numbers, which we just now proved, that since x is positive, you look at x and the number 1. Then there is a positive integer n, so that n into 1 will be greater than 5 by x. Remember, what is your statement? That if you are given any two real numbers and if x is a positive number, then you will be able to get a positive integer n, so that nx is greater than y. So we are using that in the result. Instead of x, I am using 1, and instead of y, I am using 5 by x. So I will be able to get a positive integer n, so that n into 1 is greater than 5 by x. What does that mean? That means that x is greater than 5 by n, and 5 by n is an element of capital S. So it is, you get this inequality. So therefore, x cannot be a lower bound of capital S. You get an element of capital S which is less than x. Hence, the greatest lower bound of capital S is going to be 0. Anything greater than that is no longer a lower bound. Hence, infimum of S is equal to 0. So hopefully you understand this example, and this is the first example you are seeing where the infimum does not belong to the set. Similarly, there will be examples where the supremum will not belong to the set. We will see that later on. Okay, so we will prove a very crucial result, which is almost you are used to it, but you have not seen the proof of this result, that if you take any positive real number, then there is a unique, this exclamation mark means it is unique. So there exists unique m in n such that m minus 1 is less than or equal to x less than m. Recall your real line. In the real line, what we had done was the first partition was by the integers. That is, you took a point which meant 0, then you took a point which meant 1, and a point which meant 2, and so on. And then you also had points which meant -1, -2, and so on. So you had partitioned the whole of the real line by selecting points which represented the integers. So they are giving you different segments. What we are trying to claim now is that if you take any positive real number, then it will lie in one of the segments defined by the positive integers, and there will be exactly one. So this is completely logical. You can visualize this, that if I take, say for example, anything 11 by 21, then 11 by 21 will lie between 0 and 1, it will not lie between any other 4, 5 or 7, 8 or anything like that, right? So if you take any real number, there will be a whole part of it which is called the integral part of x. So it will be greater than that integral part and less than the next positive integer. This is what you want to prove. So how do you start about it? You again use the Archimedean property. So use apply the Archimedean property to the numbers 1 and x. So you will get a positive integer. I have called that m1. So that m1 into 1 will be greater than x. That is, m1 is greater than x. Now what you do is you construct a set. What do you have to do is that you have to find an m so that m minus 1 is less than or equal to x. Right. So what we will do is we will construct the set capital S, which is the set of all positive integers n such that x is less than n. So I want a number m which has the property that m minus 1 is less than or equal to x. So I start by looking at all integers which are greater than x and keep on decreasing that integer so that after a certain stage it will go on the left hand side of x. That is basically casually speaking the proof of this. So if you look at this set, m1 belongs to s because m1 is greater than x, so it is non-empty and it is also uh, bounded below, right? So instead of going to that, let us look at this set again. This is a set of positive integers. So actually we are in a better shape. So you have a non-empty subset of the set of positive integers. So by well ordering principle, it will have a least element. So because if I took the infimum and things like that, then I would get a real number. Then I would have to modify it a little bit again to get a positive integer. So instead of going into that path, what we do is we use well ordering principle. So capital S is a non-empty subset of the set of natural numbers, positive integers. So it has a least element. Suppose that element is m. Then you get x is less than m. Very good. So what can you say now? That m could be equal to 1 or m could be greater than 1. If m is greater than 1, then m minus 1 is a positive integer again. Now m is the least element of capital S. So m minus 1 does not belong to S. What was S? S was the set of all positive integers which were greater than x. So since m minus 1 does not belong to S, it cannot be greater than x. So it has to be less than or equal to x. So that is what you get. If m is greater than 1, then m minus 1 has to be less than or equal to x, and by uh, the choice of m, it is the least element of the set capital S, you get x is less than m. So at least this inequality is satisfied. So you are able to get a little m which will satisfy this particular inequality, m minus 1 less than equal to x less than m. So one case is left out. What happens when m is equal to 1? So we are getting x is less than 1. But you know that your x is greater than 0. So since x is greater than 0, you get m minus 1 less than x less than 1. So again, you have got the inequality m minus 1 less than or equal to x less than m, because m minus 1 less than x is included in the inequality m minus 1 less than equal to x. Let us be very clear about this. So you have been able to get a m positive integer so that this inequality holds. But look at the statement. We are saying there exists, which is this uh, mirror image of E, and not only there exists a unique which is expressed by this exclamation mark. So What we want to say is that we will be able to find such an m, which we have already proved, and we want to say there is exactly one m which will satisfy this property. So what we are saying is that suppose there is another p which is a positive integer which also satisfies this property, p minus 1 less than or equal to x less than p. Then by our definition of capital S, P belongs to S. So let us go back again. So what was S? S was the set of all positive integers which were greater than X. So if I take P to be greater than X, then it is automatically in capital S. Since M was the least element of capital S, M is less than or equal to P. Now, if m was strictly less than p, then m would be less than or equal to p minus 1, because these are all positive integers, natural numbers. So if m is less than p, then m is less than or equal to p minus 1. So p minus, that is what I have written here, that p minus 1 and p are consecutive integers. So what are you getting? You already know that x is less than m. So x is also less than or equal to p minus 1. Right? So why is this a contradiction? This is a contradiction because we assumed that this p is such that p minus 1 less than or equal to x less than p, and here we are getting that x is strictly less than, notice, p minus 1, because x is strictly less than m and m is less than or equal to p minus 1. So if you look at the whole of the inequality, x has to be strictly less than p minus 1. So this is a contradiction to p minus 1 less than or equal to x. Therefore, the assumption that m less than p is false. Hence, m has to be equal to p. That is, this m which we obtained here is unique. So you have proved that for any positive real number, there will be a positive integer n, so that x will lie between m minus 1 and m, and in fact, to be precise, m minus 1 is less than or equal to x is less than m. Fine. Now, just an observation here that if x itself is not a positive integer, then it cannot be equal to m minus 1. So that I have mentioned separately, that if x is not a positive integer, then the inequality which we get is strict. That is, there is a unique m in positive integers, so that m minus 1 is less than x is less than m. So for any positive real number, you have proved this. From here, it will follow that such an inequality will be true for any real number x, provided you take m to be the set of in the set of the integers. Fine. So that is my corollary. So corollary means a result which follows from a given result. So we had proved a proposition, and then we are following up with a result which will depend, the proof of that will depend on the proposition. Therefore, we call it a corollary. So what does this corollary say? That for any real number x, there is a unique integer m, so that m minus 1 is less than or equal to x is less than m. So now let us see how to prove this. We have already shown this result for x greater than 0. If x is equal to 0, then the unique m will be 0. 0 less than or equal to x less than 1. So there is no problem with that. Now suppose x is less than 0. If x is an integer, then obviously x equal to x. So x lies in the x has this property that x is less than or equal to x is less than x plus 1, right? And clearly this is unique, because you will not be able to surpass x plus 1 here, and you will not go less than x. So this x will be unique. The final case is when x is a negative number and it is not an integer. Then look at minus x. Minus x is going to be a positive real number which is not an integer. So you are in this situation, minus x is not a positive integer. So what you have already proved is that there is a unique positive integer, so that n minus 1 is less than minus x is less than n, right? So x was less than 0, minus x is positive, for which you have proved the result, and not only that, you have also observed that this inequality is strict. So just multiply this inequality by minus 1. What do you get? Minus n less than x less than minus n plus 1. So your m is minus n plus 1. And this is unique because you start with a unique n which satisfies this. And once you get this strict inequality, this is enclosed in this equality, right? So we have proved this result, that for any real number x, there is a unique integer m, so that m minus 1 less than or equal to x is less than m. Okay, so using that, we will prove that the set of rational numbers is dense in R. So how do we show that? If you recall your first lecture, it is sufficient actually to show that between any two real numbers, there is one rational number. If you can show that, then you can immediately show that between any two real numbers, there are infinitely many rational numbers. So let us try to prove that there is one fraction between any two real numbers always. So you take any two real numbers a and b and assume that a is less than b. You want them to be different, so you just take a less than b. I want to find out this q. Okay, so first of all, since a is less than b, b minus a is greater than 0. So use the Archimedean property on b minus a and 1. So then you will be able to get a positive integer n, so that n times b minus a is greater than 1. Again, there is a m, so that this real number na will lie between m minus 1 and m. This we have proved just now, that for any real number we will be able to get a unique m, so that this inequality is true. So that real number we take to be na. Now let us look at it carefully. What is happening? Na is less than m, so we list that down first. Then from this left hand side we get that m is less than or equal to na plus 1. Now look at nb minus na is greater than 1. So nb is greater than na plus 1. So you get na plus 1 less than nb. So what have you finally got? You've got na less than m is less than nb. I hope this is all right. You just stare at this inequality. First you notice that na is less than m. Then you notice that m is less than or equal to na plus 1. Then you notice that na plus 1 is less than nb from here. So now you just divide by n. N is a positive integer, so there is no problem. So divide by n, you get a less than m by n less than b. So m by n is a rational number. So you have got that between any two real numbers, there is a rational number. Now what I'm trying to say is that this implies that there are infinitely many rational numbers between any two real numbers. That is just repetition. The argument is just a repetition of what we have already seen. So what we do is just take any two real numbers, so that a is less than b, and suppose if possible there are only finitely many rational numbers between a and b. Then what we can do is, those finitely many rational numbers we can enumerate as r1 less than r2 less than etc less than rn. So since R1, R2, Rn are all rational numbers, in particular they are real numbers. So you have this situation where A is less than R1 is less than R2, etc., less than Rn is less than B, and R1 to Rn are the only rational numbers between A and B, which implies that there can be no rational number between A and R1, which is a contradiction because just now you have proved that between any two real numbers there is at least one rational number. So if you assume that there are only finitely many rational numbers between A and B, you arrive at a contradiction. Therefore, the statement that there are only finitely many rational numbers between A and B is false, which means that what is true is that between any two real numbers, there are infinitely many rational numbers. So one term which I have been using uh, since the last lecture but not made it clear is that what are the real numbers which are not rational numbers called. I have used this term but I have not specifically mentioned that an irrational number is a number which is a real number and not a rational number. So this particular result immediately also shows that between any two real numbers, there are infinitely many irrational numbers. So I suppose by now you have got used to the fact that if you can prove that between any two real numbers, there is one irrational number, that is sufficient to say that between any two real numbers, there are infinitely many irrational numbers. So let us just try to show that between any two real numbers, there is one irrational number. So take A and B in R so that A is less than B. Now root 2 is not a rational number that I know. So I'm going to use that fact. Just look at the real number A divided by root 2 and B divided by root 2. Since A is less than B, A divided by root 2 is less than B divided by root 2, and A by root 2 and B by root 2 are both real numbers. So there is a rational number Q between them. So you get the inequality A by root 2 is less than Q is less than B by root 2. Just multiply by root 2 throughout. What do you get? A is less than square root of 2 into Q less than B. Now what can you say about square root of 2 into Q? Q is a rational number. Root 2 is not a rational number. So square root of 2 into Q cannot be a rational number. Why? Because if square root of 2 into Q were a rational number, suppose little p, then root 2 into q is equal to p will imply that root 2 is equal to p divided by q, where p is if q is okay, so there is one lacuna here. For the time being, let us assume that q is non-zero and then I will justify. Okay, so suppose q is non-zero, then square root of 2 into q is not a rational number. Why? Because if square root of 2 into q were equal to p, where p is a rational number, then square root of 2 would be equal to p divided by q, and p is a rational number, q is a rational number, so p divided by q would have been a rational number. So therefore root 2 into q is not going to be a rational number. So you have found an irrational number between a and b. Now issue is what happens when q is 0. So we have already seen that between any two real numbers there are infinitely many rational numbers that we saw just now. So just choose your q to be a non-zero rational number. We are just saying that there is a rational number between a by root 2 and b by root 2. Choose it to be non-zero. Then your argument works. Therefore, you are able to find at least one irrational number between a and b, which implies that you will be able to find infinitely many rational numbers between a and b. The argument is just the same, that suppose there are only finitely many irrational numbers between a and b, then you enumerate them from the smallest to the largest. You will get a less than r1 less than r2 less than etc less than rn less than b, where now R1, R2, etc., Rn are all irrational numbers. But since they are irrational numbers, they are at least rational numbers. So between the they are at least the real numbers. So R1 is a real number and A is a real number. Between these two real numbers, you will not be able to find any irrational number, which is a contradiction. So if there is one, there are infinitely many. So you have proved a very crucial result. That is, Q is dense in R, meaning between any two real numbers there is a rational number, and using that you have also proved that between any two real numbers there is an irrational number. So this is a point at which we can stop this lecture. In the next lecture we will continue discussing some more properties of real numbers.